Yeah, I'll react to that, sure.
Hi, guys. All right. Next up, Prince Eugene's baptism of fire, the Great Siege of Buda, 1686. My name is Connor. If you're new, thanks LXH for the video. I like to learn about things, watch stuff. Original link to the video, top description. Below that, Discord, all that good stuff. Hit all the buttons except the bad button. That's a bad button. Let's go. History March, awesome channel. Maps, phenomenal. I love my maps.
It is the late 17th century. Europe is...
If you're not ready to learn, there's the door. Home ec is down the hall. You were in the wrong class. Let's go. Or just sit in the back. That's fine.
It is the late 17th century. Europe is divided. To the east, the powerful Ottoman Empire is at the zenith of its power. Its great vizier, Kara Mustafa, pursued an ambitious foreign policy against the Habsburg lands. The Habsburg dynasty, one of Europe's leading and most powerful monarchies, did all they could to prepare for the inevitable, upcoming, decisive war. This was a theater where the great powers fought over and decided the course of history. Among the many heroic stories of individuals, one man emerged as a brilliant military commander. Just 22 years old at the iconic siege of Buda,
Eugene?
The young Eugene of Savoy rapidly made a name for himself. Rejected for military...
So Savoy is... Shoot. Where is it?
Just 22 years old at the iconic siege of Buda, the young Eugene of Savoy rapidly made a name for himself. Rejected for military service by the French king, he decided to try his luck with its main rival, the Habsburg monarchy, and with considerable success. During his lifetime, he participated in nearly every iconic battle the Habsburg monarchy fought. The war against the Ottomans was just the beginning, for he fought all over Europe, including against the French king, satisfying his personal vengeance. He stood at the forefront as history was written, and his name echoed down the centuries, for even Napoleon referred to him as one of the greatest generals of all time. In this documentary series, History Marsh and House of History, for even Napoleon
That's
in
cool.
this most accomplished military commanders of his time, from his beginnings all the way to his end.
This video is sponsored by History Hit, the best
History Hit. Awesome. Guys, make sure to use his link down there if this interests you. And History Hit is an awesome channel.
resource for anyone who wants to learn about the past. Enjoy hundreds of exclusive history documentaries about events that shaped our world, over 1,000 podcast episodes, and 5,000 articles on all of your devices. Best of all, with 2 new programs and 15 new podcast episodes every week, it's safe to say that History Hit is the true Netflix for history. I recommend The Essex Dogs, in which historian and author Dan Jones sets out on a journey across northern France, meticulously following in the footsteps of the English army on their Crécy campaign, one of the earliest and bloodiest raids of the 100 Years' War. Dan goes in depth not just about the princes and lords in charge of the campaign, but the common soldiers of King Edward III's army. And you can see this excellent series with History Hit's exclusive offer available to fans of History Marsh. Click the link below to visit History Hit and use the code HistoryMarsh when you sign up to get 50% off your next 3 months. Go where history is made with History Hit.
In 1663, Eugene was born in Paris as the 5th son of Eugene Maurice of Savoy and his wife Olympia Mancini. When he was 10 years old, his father passed away. Due to intrigues at the French court, his gambling-addicted mother fled the kingdom to Brussels, continuing her life in exile.
What did they
the
gamble
Savoy children were raised by their grandmother, Maria of Bourbon, and Aunt Louise Christina of Savoy. Eugene's family was among the top European nobility. For example, his oldest brother, Louis Thomas, was a potential candidate for the Polish throne in 1674. However eccentric as he was, his family disowned him after marrying a common girl. As the youngest of the family, it was expected of Eugene to pursue a clerical career path. However, when he turned 19, he decided he wanted a military career like his father and grandfather before him. Thanks to intrigues at the French court and King Louis XIV's personal interference, he could not find placement in the French army. In his autobiography, Eugene reflected on Louis preventing him from pursuing a future in France. There is not a Huguenot expelled by the revocation of the Edict of Nantes who hated Louis XIV more than I did. Therefore, when Louvois heard of my departure, saying, "So much the better, he will never return into this country again," I swore never to enter it but with arms in my hands. I have kept my word. Eugene traveled to Frankfurt. It just so happened that Europe stood at the brink of a major war against the Ottoman Empire. In Frankfurt, he learned of the Ottomans laying siege to Vienna. He also learned of his brother entering imperial service to fight the Ottomans, and his death soon after. This did not deter the young man. In August, he arrived at...
Guys, sorry. So this is 1686. So the Great Northern War and the War of Spanish Succession are going to happen in like 15 years. And this is... And then you have the 30 Years' War. Okay.
Also learned of his brother entering imperial service to fight the Ottomans, and his death soon after. This did not deter the young man. In August, he arrived at Emperor Leopold's quarters at Passau to offer his services to the Habsburg monarchy. His first appointment was as the bodyguard of Charles of Lorraine, commander of the imperial army. After the 1683 siege of Vienna, lasting for 2 months, by September the 12th, the Christian coalition emerged victorious over the Ottomans. Eugene distinguished himself during the siege and Battle of Vienna. The emperor rewarded him with command over the Kufstein Dragoon Regiment and several commendations. Eugene was poised for a lightning campaign toward great heights at 20 years old. Geopolitical developments rapidly followed each other up. The Ottoman failure of the Second Siege of Vienna marked the start of the Great Turkish War. The victors established the Holy League in March 1684. Its members, the Habsburg monarchy, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and the Republic of Venice, agreed to drive the Ottomans from Europe entirely. That same year, they led an assault against Buda, a city that had been under Ottoman rule for 145 years. The siege ended in failure, and after nearly 4 months, the Holy League had to withdraw.
Guys, I gotta pee really bad. I'll be right back. All right, sorry. I washed my hands.
Suffering heavy losses. Nearly 4 months, the Holy League had to withdraw, suffering heavy losses. But Eugene continued his rise through the ranks. By 1685, he was promoted to Major General, with many surviving accounts of his superiors remarking the young man was poised for great things. In 1686, the Holy League decided to try and relieve Buda once more. They mustered up a much larger multinational army. Up to 100,000 men from all over Europe traveled to the Habsburg lands to relieve the city from the Ottoman yoke. The Holy League's commanders were told the objective was not just to relieve Buda, but the ruin of the Ottoman Empire.
So even after all the hostilities from the 30 Years' War, Europe is cohesive enough to band together, seeing that, you know, they're all Christian and European and fighting a non-Christian, non-European power. You know, they all have something to gain and stuff to lose if they lose, so I get that. But still, it seems like the 1600s was full of not so great inter-European relations. So
June 12th, long columns departed on both banks of the Danube. When they approached Buda 4 days later, engineers built bridges and soldiers dug trenches around the city to cut it off from Ottoman lines entirely. Meanwhile, the Ottomans prepared for the impending siege their scouts warned them of inside Buda. Their commander, Abdi Pasha, the Albanian, gave a speech to all his troops, telling them the Sultan instructed them to defend Buda to the last drop of their blood. The Ottoman garrison numbered some 13,000 men, including Janissaries, Sipahis, and 2,000 inhabitants. Buda's central feature was, without a doubt, Buda Castle, strategically built on a rocky outcrop.
Isn't there some kind of rule where an invading army needs like a 5-to-1 advantage over the defending army in a fortress, in a siege? And they do have that number, so.
Around the castle was the higher town. Below that, the lower town, built on the banks between the river and the castle's slope, protected the gates and citadel's ports. The lower town's walls were still battered from the siege 2 years before, though the Ottomans had made many repairs. Upon their arrival, the Allied army seized the empty pest across the Danube and dug their trenches. The Ottomans' artillery occasionally fired at them. However, the occasional skirmishes with Sipahis storming from the city's gates failed to cause a real dent in the Holy League's process. On June 21st, the Allied batteries launched their first volleys against the lower town. The Ottomans failed to return fire, and after 2 days of the assault, the first breaches emerged. On June 24th, the Bavarians launched the first assault through the breach. They charged towards the city, leapt through the wall, and faced surprisingly little resistance. Sure, minor skirmishes followed, but the Bavarians soon discovered that most of the Ottoman garrison fortified themselves in the city above. Seizing the lower city was an early and, frankly, an easy victory. Moreover, the Holy League received news of their irregulars capturing a boat with the Pasha's family down the river towards Belgrade. Things were looking good. Having secured the lower town, the offensive focused on Buda Castle, the fortified high town. Using Pest as a springboard, the alliance seized St. Gelert's Hill. Their heavy artillery was ideal for bombarding the Ottoman positions accurately. The Ottomans were surrounded, and they felt it from every angle. But the Ottomans were tenacious. Throughout the siege, they followed a rather clear pattern. Near daily, the Holy League focused on different areas to concentrate their attacks. The Ottomans sent their vanguard to fight in the front lines, while others put up palisades behind them. Once these were up, the front line disengaged, and the attackers were left far in advance, subject to accurate fire. Often, upon the Allied retreat, Janissaries
Interesting tactic.
launched a lightning charge against their trenches. Savage, brutal, close combat followed, rarely resulting in the Allies gaining the upper hand.
So he attacked them, so they attacked him just to stall while they build these walls around, so that when they both sides retreat, the archers, the attackers escaping are controlled like kind of like sheep inside of and it's easier to shoot. Very cool.
Allied casualties mounted without any real progress. Even personal accounts described the Ottoman steadfastness. We could not force the palisaded retrenchment of the besieged behind the breach, and our chief officers were all either wounded or killed by the continued firing of the enemy. It was thought convenient for our assailants to retreat, though they had fought like lions. Even the compact, fast-firing Turkish bow proved a better weapon than the musket. Weeks of this pattern followed. During one of the skirmishes, Eugene was shot by a Turkish arrow through his hand. Slowly, an Allied strategy crystallized. Their attacks concentrated against the city gate, convinced this was the crucial point where they could achieve victory. The Alliance got lucky a few times. A mortar shell blew up a powder magazine 1 month after the siege commenced. The blast killed as many as 1,000 defenders. The Duke hoped
What?
The blast killed as many as 1,000 defenders. The Duke hoped this was a watershed moment and sent an emissary with a summons to surrender. But Abdi Pasha's response was for the Duke to come wrested from his hands. There seemed no end in sight. When the pattern of battle repeated itself in July, the Alliance was caught off guard in their trenches. They suffered over 3,000 casualties, a significant blow for the Allies. But whereas the Alliance suffered heavily, the Ottomans were hard-pressed as well. When rumors reached the Duke of dissent among the Ottoman lines, he sent an emissary for surrender. The emissary returned with an answer hinting at the Pasha trying to find an honorable way out of the impasse. However, the Pasha was in no position to surrender. Doing so against the Grand Vizier's orders would cost him his life. So they reached no solution, and the artillery bombardment and occasional charges continued.
Interesting. So even though his family is taken and it's not looking great, and they're trying to give him like an honorable way out, he knows that if he did, then both him and his family would probably be in more danger if they were captured by their own side. So that makes sense.
On August 13th, the Duke received news from his scouts. An Ottoman army numbering some 40,000 troops marched towards Buda. Their Tatar cavalry was already harassing the Alliance's supply lines. In response, the Duke collected all of his cavalry, among which Eugene's dragoons and a sizable portion of his infantry, and embarked on a march south to meet the main Ottoman army. Not many details survive of the subsequent battle, except that the Hungarian Hussar vanguard ran into the Ottoman main army. They feigned a retreat, allowing the remainder of their cavalry to flank the Ottomans. Surviving witness statements reveal they were massacred like wild beasts that fell into the hunter's net. The fighting continued all day. By nightfall, 3,000 Ottomans lay dead on the battlefield, and the remainder of the army was in full retreat. When the Duke returned to the trenches, he ordered his army to display the colors and standards from the slain Ottomans.
Wait, they did mean the Hussars were slaughtered.
He hoped this would unnerve the defenders enough to reach the siege's end. But no such thing. He ordered his army to display the colors and standards from the slain Ottomans. He hoped this would unnerve the defenders enough to reach the siege's end. But no such thing happened. Quite the contrary, the Ottomans resisted with more determination. On the outskirts of the trenches, Allied encampments were harassed by loosely organized Ottoman skirmishers. Though not numerous enough to impact the outcome of the siege, they certainly contributed to the bloodshed. Again, this continued for weeks. Finally, on August 30th, 5 infantry regiments and 25 cavalry squadrons arrived to reinforce the Allies. The following day, the Duke and his generals agreed there wasn't enough progress, and they were in an ideal position to strike decisively. On the morning of September the 2nd, the Ottomans saw a lot of movement in the Allied camp. Rumors reached them the day before of the Allied army marching south against the Grand Vizier's army. A small siege party would be left to keep them in check. It appeared the defenders would finally enjoy some breathing room.
I'm still not quite clear who slaughtered who in that kind of run-in with the army and the cavalry. I think it was the Alliance cavalry that got slaughtered.
The Allied army took up positions in 3 columns, seemingly ready to leave Buda behind. But then horns sounded, and battle cries emerged from the Allied lines.
So many mind.
The soldiers suddenly turned around. As the enormous Allied army stormed the city's gate, the Allied artillery opened fire. Brutal fighting broke out as the 3 assault columns reached the Ottomans defending the front lines. Their numerical superiority and the weariness of the defenders allowed them to swiftly overrun the initial lines. Combat continued, and slowly but surely the Allies pushed up the city's hill. Several defenders surrendered, but to no avail. It was an incredible slaughter. the Duke and Elector of Bavaria sent direct orders for the soldiers not to massacre any surrendering prisoners.
Go a bit easy.
On the walls of the higher town, the Pasha
Imagine all of like the rapes and stuff that must have happened too.
met his end. On the walls of the higher town, the Pasha met his end. Eyewitness accounts state he died bravely upon the breach, where he defended himself valiantly with his scimitar in his hand, scorning to retreat or demand quarter. In total, no more than 2,000 of the 13,000 defenders survived. The Allied victory was a significant military triumph for the Christians after 145 years of Ottoman rule.
Hey, he died like a champion, like a soldier, and I got to give him the salute, you know. I liked him. From
Prince
the little I
Eugene
saw.
played a minor role during this epic siege, but it was just the beginning of his military career.
We're watching the next.
The siege of Buda and subsequent military campaigns exemplify the tumultuous time that marked Eugene's legendary career.
If you've made it this far into the
Awesome video, guys. We're going right into the next one here. Let's go. Prince Eugene's decisive cavalry charge and Second Battle of Mohawks, 1687.
The 1680s proved a fruitful period for the Habsburg war effort. The siege of Vienna was beaten back. The Hungarian capital, Buda, was captured, and many strategic fortresses were seized throughout Hungary. This rollback of Ottoman influence had rightly caused a wave of optimism in the Austrian capital. Eugene of Savoy, while only playing a minor role during these campaigns, commanded his regiment with distinction and was noticed by the Margrave Louis of Baden, who wrote of the young Eugene in his letter to Emperor Leopold. This young man will, with time, occupy the place of those whom the world regards as great leaders of armies. Impressed by Louis's letter, Emperor Leopold promoted Eugene to Major General. But in the east, the winter of 1686 was greeted with great concern. While the Ottomans had been the dominant power for centuries, now Grand Vizier Sari Suleiman Pasha understood the empire's peril.
Sorry, I just love that name. Mehmed. I think that sounds so cool. Sorry, guys. Something wrong with my OBS right there.
Suleiman Pasha understood the empire's concern. While the Ottomans had been the dominant power for centuries, now Grand Vizier Sari Suleiman Pasha understood the empire's perilous situation and tried opening peace negotiations with the Habsburgs. But the Holy Roman Emperor and his commanders wanted to capitalize on the momentary weakness of the Ottoman Empire. They would settle for nothing less than the complete reconquest of Hungary. This episode is brought to you by Brilliant, the best online tool to teach yourself science, technology, and
Guys, please use the links in this original video's description. He
engineering and
deserves
math.
it, the money.
I think there's a big difference between just learning something and truly understanding something.
By the way,
I could explain to you that when a cannon fires a shot, the cannonball will fly through the air in the shape of a parabola. And if you memorize that factoid, I guess that would technically mean you learned it. But would you remember it? Would you understand why? Would you be able to tell me what would happen
whenever
if we
someone
changed any of
sends
the variables
for
in our model?
like
if
a
instead
piece,
of memorizing,
you
actually
either
understood the interplay of
because
forces acting on that object, you would
they
know
think
what shape
they're
the cannonball
depleted
would
and they
make as
want
it
to
flew
just,
through
you know,
the
not
air.
go any further
And you'd
because they're
also know
scared they're
what
going to
would
lose.
happen if we launched it into
Or it's
space
to
or
buy
underwater
time.
or without
So,
gravity. That is understanding.
If you're ever sent
And you
like
will
an
remember
order
the
to give
things that
up
you
and
understand for a lot
or
longer than
a
the things
request,
you merely learned.
just never follow it, I
Brilliant's
guess.
interactive courses are structured in such a way to make sure that you are understanding the subject as you go. To get started for free, go to brilliant.org/historymarsh or click the link in the description. And the first 200 of you will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. Keep exploring at Brilliant. Not long after the capture of Buda came the first snow of 1686, and both the Habsburg and the Ottoman armies retreated to their winter quarters. But preparations for the upcoming campaign next spring had already begun. The Habsburgs used the lull in the fighting to recruit mercenaries and other combatants, as well as to drill the troops. For Leopold, this was no longer a regular war. It now became a crusade. In contrast, the Ottomans faced a severe financial crisis. To combat the lack of funds for the war effort, new taxes were imposed, and the ruling family opened the coffers in Istanbul.
So a coffer is just like a bank? Vault?
This was enough to fund the troops on the front line, but in terms of recruitment, the Grand Vizier received only levied troops, many of whom were inexperienced and lacked military training. The losses during 1686 had been so severe that for the first time in history, the Ottoman Empire attempted to open peace negotiations with their enemies, but to no avail. Come spring of 1687, the Habsburg advance had begun. The Duke of Lorraine.
He's buying time, or just whenever, just denied.
Marched towards Osijek in Croatia with between 30 and 40,000 troops. The Elector of Bavaria and Emperor Leopold's son-in-law, Max Emanuel, marshaled an army of some 20,000 along the river Tisa. The armies joined along the way, and in early August they laid siege to Osijek. Suleiman Pasha had remained in Belgrade during the winter. When he learned of the Imperial Army's siege, he began a march along the Danube with his 60,000-strong Ottoman army. When he reached Osijek, he swiftly repulsed the Imperials and pursued them to the north. A few days later, the Imperial Army reached Nagahashani, a town to the southwest of Mohacs. It was here that the army of Suleiman the Magnificent broke the Hungarian kingdom. The death of its king, the virtual decapitation of the nobility, and the subsequent subjugation of its territory made the Battle of Mohacs in 1526 a powerful symbol in the collective memory of both the Hungarians and the Ottomans. Now, 161 years later, this symbolism was not lost on the two warring sides.
Guys, I'm sorry if this was answered when I asked it before, but who are the Ottomans dealing with on their other borders, to their right, or to their east, and to their southeast, or even southwest? You know, like what was the deal? Why aren't they trying to like conquer like what was before Persia, and just kind of set a defense against Europe? I don't know.
The Duke and Elector understood the decisive battle was imminent. The rugged terrain around Nagahashani hindered the Duke's army. He ordered his right and center flanks to move to Siklos over a narrow, long road. A dense forest separated Siklos and Nagahashani, and the Imperial Army had a tough time traversing the road. The Bavarians remained stationary around Nagahashani to protect this maneuver. Likely unbeknownst to them, the Duke was moving away from the Ottoman camp, because to the south, Sari Suleiman Pasha knew his enemy was closing in. His troops constructed defenses as scouts closely watched the Imperial movements. When reports told him that the Imperial Army broke up to reposition itself, he decided to act fast. Maximilian's Bavarian wing was an excellent target. Historians estimate the distance between the Bavarians and the Duke's army was nearly 5 kilometers. When the Grand Vizier realized the Bavarians were stationary and separated, and that the gap between the Imperial troops widened, he ordered the attack.
Okay, but quick question. would it be feasible to, like, you know how they exploded the ammunitions in the past episode, to like see where a battle is likely to occur, and then in a strategic point, like, place a bunch of like ammunition underground, and then have someone like a scout go for like a peace offering, but really he's just going to set off the thing with a something. Actually, the more I think about it, never mind.
His right flank, mainly consisting of cavalry, swerved to the right. His left flank, mainly infantry, launched a charge against the Bavarian infantry. Meanwhile, the center continued the construction of the defenses. Far in advance, 5,000 Sipahis rode to outflank the stationary Bavarians. Their fast advance alerted the Habsburgs of the impending attack. Maximilian frantically deployed his army in 2 lines and dispatched messengers to the Imperial Army traveling towards Siklos. Eugene of Savoy was one of the first imperial commanders to learn of the Ottoman attack. He immediately turned around with his small cavalry contingent and rushed to the aid of the Bavarian infantry. But the real danger was to their left, the Sipahis. The war diary of a Bavarian major general mentions how Louis William, Margrave of Baden-Baden, rallied a considerable cavalry force with incredible speed and launched a counterattack to stop the Ottomans. They clashed to the Bavarian left. Fierce combat ensued, without either side gaining a clear advantage. A similar battle emerged among the infantry. All the way to the west, news of the Ottoman attack reached the Duke of Lorraine. Despite requests for urgent assistance, Charles did not move. Valuable time was lost, as he reportedly did not believe that Maximilian faced the main Ottoman attack. It took a lot of convincing by lower commanders before the Duke decided to turn the army around. Meanwhile, the rapid deployment of the Bavarians and the grueling, indecisive battle unnerved the Grand Vizier. Suleiman Pasha was well aware that the lack of progress, despite having the element of surprise, was due to the relative inexperience of many raw recruits in the Ottoman ranks. Rather than risking the morale of his troops breaking under pressure, he ordered the cavalry and infantry to retreat and his cannons to open fire. An artillery duel erupted, with infantry and cavalry stationary, facing each other. Maximilian urged Charles to launch a major counterattack. The Duke refused and started organizing another trek towards Siklos. In frustration, Maximilian and Louis reported to Charles that they would mount a counterattack, even without his support. Left with no choice, the Duke of Lorraine relented and started arraying his men on the imperial right. But in the meantime, the Grand
Hey, at least it wasn't like crazy, stubborn megalomaniac. Yeah, okay.
Vizier used the time to reform his battle lines and steel his men for another attack. The Ottomans repeated the same pattern, a concentrated attack against the Bavarian flank. The Sipahis were tasked with sweeping around them, while the Janissary infantry advanced head-on, supported by another contingent of Sipahis on their own left flank. Because the Duke was still stuck behind the dense woods, his flank could barely come to the Bavarian aid. Still, some of his troops slowly trickled towards the Bavarian lines as reinforcements. The Bavarian infantry countered the Janissary charge. Eugene led his cavalry into battle, taking a position among the vanguard. In the ensuing clash, the Janissaries were slowly pushed towards the constructed Ottoman barricades. Eugene's cavalry pursued them until they were in shooting distance. Some sources mention the cavalry pausing briefly until the entire Bavarian infantry caught up. As soon as the cavalry and infantry combined, Maximilian ordered the general attack. Meanwhile, the dense woods shielding the Ottoman left flank continued holding back the Duke and a part of his army. When it became clear that traversing the woods was impossible, Charles tried to circumvent them.
Why impossible? So I'm thinking of answers to my own question, but I'm going to ask anyway. Why not go through the woods? Because it'll mess up your formation, or like it's the terrain is too rough and unforgiving and unpredictable to bring heavy equipment through. But I mean, you'd really surprise them. Like, what if you trek through the woods and then like set up? I mean, it's not like they have GPS. Oh, okay.
Unfortunately,
Never mind.
this maneuver took hours, and his part of the army would not reach the battlefield in time. Elsewhere, savage fighting took place on the barricades. As the infantry battle went on, Louis's cavalry pushed back the Sipahis. Then the Margrave of Baden-Baden swerved to the Ottoman right, charging into their flank. Simultaneously on the other end, Eugene, leading his men from the front, broke through the enemy line with his cavalry contingent. Suddenly, the Janissary infantry was at risk of getting trapped in a pincer movement. During this time, the Bavarian infantry continued the push. As the battle raged, cracks emerged in the Ottoman infantry formations. Some held firm, fighting to the death. But most, unable to hold the enemy back, broke and fled. The marshy terrain and ample rivers prevented the Grand Vizier from conducting an orderly retreat. Many fell victim to the marshy terrain and the Drava River. As night fell, it appeared the Imperial army.
Can I just say, I just flipped that bottle without looking and it landed. Sorry.
Had orderly retreat. Many fell victim to the marshy terrain and the Drava River. As night fell, it appeared the Imperial army had won, against all odds. Contemporary sources mention the casualty numbers, but they should be viewed with a dose of skepticism. Namely, they mention that the Imperial army suffered under 3,000 dead or wounded. In contrast, the heavy Ottoman casualties were owed to the Drava River, where many drowned or were killed during the pursuit. Up to 8,000 were killed or wounded, and 2,000 were captured. The Imperial forces seized 78 artillery pieces, 50...
How did many drown? Just because the equipment was too heavy? I mean, how... Take the equipment off? How did you drown?
56 flags and 5,000 muskets.
I'm probably sounding like a dumb arse, but let me know.
The defeat at the Battle of Mohacs sent shockwaves throughout the Ottoman Empire. Worse, it highlighted the instability of the state. After a botched counterattack, the Grand Vizier's army mutinied in Petrovaradin. He fled to Istanbul, and the angry troops followed. Soon after, a widespread mutiny broke out throughout the empire, culminating in the Grand Vizier's execution and the deposition of Sultan Mehmed IV. The mutiny lasted until April 1688. Consequently, the Habsburg leadership capitalized on the turmoil within the Ottoman state. The imperial troops advanced in a lightning campaign, conquering vital cities and strongholds, including Osijek, Petrovaradin, and Eger. In December, the Hungarians...
Does this start the beginning? Because I'm starting to see the outline of Austria-Hungary. Like, so is this where Austria-Hungary becomes, or the Austrian Empire that we know, like in the World War II? Because I can see what I used to call, like, it always looked like a manatee, a big fat manatee. Okay.
The Hungarian Diet elected the Habsburgs as hereditary kings of Hungary. As
Right.
for Eugene, in recognition
So that is
of his exceptional leadership in the battle, the Duke of Lorraine gave him the honor of personally informing Emperor Leopold of the victory at Mohacs. In turn, the Emperor promoted Eugene to Lieutenant General.
level up.
Word of his daring exploits traveled far, and King Charles of Spain admitted Eugene to the Order of the Golden Fleece. His star was on the rise, but he would soon face his greatest challenge yet.
If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget.
Thank you for making. Awesome video. Thank you, LXH, for the recommendation. And I love that I got that little treat at the end of connecting it to something else, like the Austro-Hungarian Empire borders becoming a thing and Hungary kind of pledging to them. Cool, cool, cool. Hope you guys learned something or can teach me something. I will continue learning about history and all things European. And I hope to see you guys next time. Hope you're doing well. If not, love you guys. Chin up. You'll be good soon. Don't worry. Bye.